Okay, so this is part 2 of the Illustrator demo. So we're going to look a little bit more into panels, into some of the panels up here as well as the menu, so you can kind of get an idea of how to add some more effects and actually use your numerical information to directly affect the way that you build your shape. So you can use your numbers, almost input them into Illustrator, and it builds shapes and things based on those numbers. So I'm going to go once again to New. And I'm going to stick with letter, and I'm just going to click OK. I'm actually going to save this document ahead of time because I think it's so important that you're saving throughout the entire process constantly. Command S, Command S, Command S, keeping that saved. So you can just leave everything the way that is in the Save panel, unless, one note is when you save, something you can do, if you have CC at home and someone else doesn't, or you need to go back, you can save as a legacy format. So if you have the newest CC, whichever CC that one is, a lot of our computers are not updated to the newest CC. So go and save it as a legacy format, so like a CS6 or something. That way when you bring it back to school, you can open it and you're not going to have a problem with it not rendering. Illustrator tends to have this problem less often than InDesign, but this is something you can do in all of the programs, Photoshop included. You can save as legacy formats to make sure that you can maintain your editability. So that's something worth making note of when you save. So now that I have my sample 2 open, let's play. I'll blend a couple things and we'll start looking at stuff and seeing kind of what shapes we can do. So I'm going to click and hold and show you, obviously we have some different tools. We have a rectangle tool, rounded rectangle, ellipse, polygon, and star. The star, like the polygon, if we click, we can select how many points it has. So maybe you make these stars and the different numbers of points relate to some element in the data. So maybe if there was 10 people that participated, you give the star 10 points. And it will create that. You can then continue to click and just change that information. I accidentally clicked and dragged, but if you just click, this star has 5 points. It's really tiny, so you can just grab it and make it bigger if it got weird or small. You can use your transform panel to make these all the same size as well, which I'll show in a moment. Oops, not what I wanted. I need the star. So click. This one will have 8 points. It's really teeny. Click. I can see that it's because my size is really small, so I can actually set them to be 1-inch stars. And this one will have 9 points. Oh, I don't know what I just did to that thing, but click. 9. Radius is, let's do like 0.5. And then radius 2. Oh, okay, so I think this has to do with the inner radius of the circle of the star and then the distance of the point from that center area. So if I set that to 0.5 and 1, I should get what I was looking to get. So, okay, that's interesting. I did not actually know that about the star tool. I normally just make the star whatever size it is and then I deal with it. So type, and I keep clicking the type tool. All right, and then let's make this a 4-pointed star. Click, and now I have a variety of stars. So maybe these points relate to one piece of my data, and then color may relate to another piece of data. So the way I colorize these, it's pretty easy. I can grab them. All I have to do is, I'm not sure, it's a little different in Photoshop because you don't have strokes and fills. You just want to make sure whatever you're trying to change is in front. So if I want to take the stroke off, like I don't want to have black borders, I click that to bring it in front, and then I can hit none. Now, before I let go of the shape, I want to click the fill, and I want to give it a fill, simply so that I can actually see my shapes here. So I'll make that like a light pink. Then I'm going to do the same here. I can actually do it to all of them at once, so I'll grab them, take the stroke, and turn that off. And then when I fill, if I want to get the same pink, I dragged it over here. So instead, I can actually use the eyedropper to grab that color, and it will make it match. So that will apply to pretty much everything. So if the stroke was this way, it'll apply it to that as well. So if I take this item, and I go and I give it like an orange stroke, and I bump up that stroke right here so we can see it to like 4, I can grab all of these shapes, use the eyedropper, and it will match the look. So that's something that I didn't think to mention because it seems so obvious to me, but is really important so that you don't have to like go and refine this pink and try and guess and click this and, you know, be like, oh God, how do I find the color? This is an interesting thing to note is when you have the color panel open, you could actually use this to make your colors. So let's say you had, red is the color, the main color here. You could change the range based on your data. So if it was 47% of the people, I could type in 47 and it will change that pink. If this one was 89% of the people, I could hit 89 and it will change that pink. Same thing here. So you can actually, the reason Illustrator is the right program for this data visualization project is you can use your numbers directly in the program to build this information in. So you don't have to be able to draw. Of course, you can sort of guesstimate, like I'm not going to be really a big stickler on making sure that that's exactly 47% darker than this one, but it gives you a general idea and it makes your life really easy to do. So if this one's 10, set it to 10. If this one's 32, set it to 32. So we can use the points of the stars, the colors of the stars, and I've already have 2 pieces of data applied to these objects, and it took me like 2 minutes. So this is a great way to work with that. Now, let's say my stars are all kind of different sizes, and I want them all to match. We talked about the Pathfinder and the Align panel, so I may want to center align these first. So, bam, now they're aligned. And I can go to transform, and I can actually transform them. If I go here and just start scaling, they'll all scale. But I can do something else under here. Under the object panel, there's a lot of useful things. We have our blend that we talked about. We have some distort. We have some perspective tools, live paint, clipping masks, a lot of things. We also have transform. And this is a really essential panel here for, once again, using your data to change things. I'm going to show you a couple things. So in transform, if I go to transform each, this panel will come up and I can change them individually here. So I can say I want all of these shapes to be 50% bigger, or I want them to rotate by 20 degrees or whatever. So if I change the horizontal scale to 150 and I preview that, you can see it stretches them all. So you can transform multiple objects at once. Likewise, I can grab the objects individually and then tell them to be a certain size. So if this one, I think these ones should be about 1 inch. I can say 1 inch, you be 1 inch, you also need to be 1 inch, you need to be 1 inch. And this one looks like it might do something weird because they're slightly different. There we go. And this one also needs to be 1 inch. So I can use my transform panel without having to sit there and scale and try and get them to match. Now that at their outermost points, they all match in size, which makes it look a little neater. So that's kind of a way that I sort of work with those stars. So let me show you some other kind of cool stuff you can do. I'm going to take this star. I'm just going to hit shift and make it a little bigger. And I'm actually going to kind of create a cool effect. So I'll show you how I do this. Now, over here, you're going to see these little circles. They kind of look like a blend tool. They're not. This is the transparency and effects panel. All my photographers should recognize under this drop down a lot of these layer effects. Multiply, overlay, soft light, screen. For the most part, they work almost exactly the same as they do in Photoshop. As in, multiply will eliminate all blacks and make it overlay, essentially. Whereas screen and the overlay, this little box has to do with removing white. That's why these little borders exist. These all affect the black in the image. These all affect the white. These affect, I think, color. And then this has to do with sort of more grayscale stuff. So that's why they're divided. You got to play with them. But I'm going to set this one to multiply. And I'm going to show you something cool you can do with the transform panel. So I'm going to go to Object, Transform, and I'm going to hit Rotate. Now, what I can do is I can just sort of set an amount of rotation. I'm going to make this like, let's make this 15 degrees rotation. You can do negative as well, and you can see this little thing change. I'm going to hit Preview so I can see, and instead of hitting OK, I'm going to hit Copy, and it's going to make a second one. If I hit Command D, I can continue to copy that to make this interesting shape. So if you actually change the angle or do this a different amount of times, you can continue to create really cool shapes that make different effects. So these are all ways to start using your data number. So in the same way, if I copy over this item here, this time I'm going to do it slightly different. I'm going to go to Transform, Rotate. This time I'm going to rotate it by a smaller amount of degrees. Let's say the data was different here. We'll do 5, and we'll hit Copy and then hit Command D. And you can see, even though it's the same shape, the data changes. This is how I created those hypercotoid shapes I made with the whale image. And let me pull that up just so you can see what I'm talking about there. We'll go into, what are we in, Rapid Viz, bloop. And then somewhere around here, I should have Demo AI. Here we go. So let's pull this into Illustrator, and I'll show you that that is exactly how I created these shapes. I literally made an oval, and then I used the rotation, and I just copied it as many times as the data. So in this case, I hit Command D 47 times. 9 of those were, so this, my issue was supposed to be like whales spotted and the whales that didn't come back the next year. I just changed the color of a few of them. So you can see in 2004, more whales were spotted, so a lot more circles happened. versus here it was 44. So I didn't do some kind of magical thing to make this. All I did was use that transform and hit Command D as many times as my number. That was it. So it's actually, I created some really interesting visualizations because we can clearly see differences between them. This shape looks much denser than this one does. So we know that there's less here than there were here. So we get kind of some interesting effects, but that's really something you can play with is your transform panel and using the copy command and then Command D to continue copy. When you go to that, and you grab the object and go to Object Transform, you'll see Transform again is Command D, and that's why I'm able to get it to keep rotating that degree. So it copies it and kind of does it a second way. So that's a really great thing, Transform panel. Once again, this multiply and these transparency effects can be really useful. For example, let's say instead I kind of have circles and I'm doing a map per se, and I want to show different things that happen on this map, but I kind of really want to show the density. So if I have these little circles, I'm just going to make one, and I'm going to hit Option Drag and keep making more. I can also commit, copy and paste, but I really want to show the density here, but there's so many. I'm not really dragging really good there. There we go. There's so many that I can't really see how dense that area is getting. So let's say this is on a map, and I want to show. So like this is like a neighborhood, and this is like people who live here that speak this language or something. So I have a lot more here than I can see. If I grab all of these and I either set the transparency to be something, I can start seeing them overlay, or I can once again use my multiply command to show, and then we really start to see the density because there's some transparency in the way the shapes overlap. So if I don't like that these have strokes, I can just take that off. Oops, I was in the wrong part. There we go. So then I'm really starting to get an effect. So can I look and count all those circles? Probably not. But I get an idea of what's happening based on the way these colors overlap. So that is another really useful effect. So you can really see that these are starting to show data even though I haven't used one pen tool, I haven't drawn a thing. It's just using shapes and using color and using size to really make these changes. So likewise, if I wanted to use circles to show a different piece of data, and I start them all the same size, so let's say this is my base size here. I can grab each of these circles, go back to my transform panel, and change their size, or I can obviously go Object Transform Scale, and I can say that this one needs to be, let's see, Scale and Stroke Effects, Uniform. I can make this bigger or smaller by any percentage. So if this is my base size and 30% less people did whatever the subject matter is, I can set this to be, what is that? Would that be 70%? Negative 70%? And it will make it 30% smaller. Do you see how I can use the math here? And then if I click OK, this is now 30% smaller than this. This is 70% of this shape. Same here. So I could take this one, go to Object Transform Scale, and this one 20% more people than this number used the product. Let's say this is like hair cream or something. I can set this to 120, and it will make it 20% bigger than 100%, which is the base size. So you can start using your numbers in a really sensible way here that hopefully will help you so you don't have to guess and try and like resize stuff. You can actually just use transform to make it work, to use your colors, change the percentages. Really easy stuff. So I'll do the same thing to this one. Object Transform Scale, and then this one, let's say maybe it's like 180%, 80% more than the base size. So there you go. So that allows me to do things like that. You could of course make the circles, and when you click, actually just input a size based on that. So I could say that this one, let's say 80% of people liked the hair cream. I can make the size 80 pixels. That says inches, so let's see if we can change that here. Pixels. So it automatically changes it. That's a neat thing. Even though my measurements are in inches, I can type in pixels, and that makes it an 80 pixel circle. I can then go to my circle tool again, click once, and then maybe 60%, 64% liked it. So I can go 64 pixels. And then I should probably just link these so that they don't do that. Let me unlink it for a second while I do that. So 64 pixels. And then I'm going to link it, I'm going to click OK. So this is now a measurement of 64. So the scale of these objects is directly related to the percentages. I don't have to go guesstimate. I can just do that by creating the shape the right size. So that's a great way to do it. So for your example, you have the ice cream scoops. You could make these circles and just use your numbers to make the circle size. And then if you need them to be bigger on the page, all you do is grab both of them and make them bigger. They will stay proportionate to one another. So you could use that as your base way of building your shapes to make your things there. So really easy way to kind of build stuff. I know we talked a lot about the transform, but another cool thing is we can get some really neat color effects with our overlays too. So maybe like color plays an important role in your visualization. So that's what I'm saying. So I'm thinking stuff through. I do this. This is my job. Okay, so if I set this to multiply, remember we can get new colors. We can use this color as part of the data. So maybe this Venn diagram element is something to do with the number of people who live there and the number of people who caught Ebola, which would probably be something like this, because not very many people actually caught the disease. But so you can use, you know, color to create overlays. So maybe this is like percentage of people visited, percentage of people who caught the disease, percentage of people that lived there, and then also had the disease. So you could actually make some really cool visualizations like this, where you have, oops, let's grab both, option drag, and then so you could have like different little data points that kind of change and rotate and make new information. So I want you to really think about those panels. The last thing before we gotta get done, we're getting close to our end of our time here. I want to show you the layers panel and then also the brushes panel just really fast. Your type panels, these are obvious. These are exactly the same as they are essentially in Photoshop. It's all there. You have open type. Don't worry about that unless you're one of the designers and know what I'm talking about. It's all there. Type. The brush panel allows you to create textured strokes, and you can go download brushes and strokes from the internet to create texture. So let's say you want this to have a really cool sort of rough border. You can kind of let that be artistic and sort of play with how that looks. I could even kind of make the color the same, and then it sort of just gives it this nice soft effect. So that stuff comes at the end. Decoration and like little worry about it at the end. Worry about getting the base of what's happening here first, and then I can use my eyedropper to actually grab that effect, or I should be able to apply the stroke now. There we go. So I can, you know, play with it a little bit. Now the layers panel, this is important to know, is slightly different. If I move these objects, like let's say I create some different objects on this layer, it doesn't matter if these objects are on their own layer. So I can actually highlight them, they'll show up in blue, and I can drag them up and they'll become red because that's the layer color. It doesn't matter though. It doesn't matter what layer I'm on, I can still grab anything from any layer. This can be very overwhelming if you're not used to the fact that you will need to start locking layers to do that. It's not like Photoshop where when you're on a layer, you're on that layer and that's the only layer you affect. When you do this, you actually need to lock your layers. Otherwise, everything maintains its ability to be moved around, which is actually, it makes sense for what Illustrator ends up really being used for. I know it'll be disorienting at first, but just keep that in mind. But if you accidentally get things that are on the wrong layer, like let's say half of these ended up on this layer, it's not a big deal. You can highlight every object, see what layers it is currently on based on the color of the vector points, and then drag them down together so that they stay on their own layer. So you can very easily move things from layer to layer in a way that is not true of Photoshop, which is actually quite wonderful once you understand how to use the program. But just be aware that as you do your layers, you can name them, you know, this could be bubbles or something. You just have to remember that if you don't want to affect the objects, lock them so that you're not accidentally like grabbing things and they're just going everywhere, or that you're trying to select something and there's 50 things on top of it. It can be really helpful. You can still relayer, you know, reorder stuff, move things around. The layer panels are pretty similar. New layers, trash layers. If you had multiple artboards, you could swap between artboards this way as well. But for the most part, hopefully does that give you even more insight into kind of how you can really play with this and use your numbers? So don't think that because Illustrator is new to you, you can't create beautiful graphics. Something as simple as this can look so elegant and be really, really interesting. So don't overwhelm yourself with having to draw the objects you're depicting. Think about how you can do things like this, which are sort of appealing in their own way, and then just, you know, work with your labeling and make it kind of look elegant that way. So that's the end of the demo here. I'm going to get this uploaded for you, but otherwise I will see you folks next class.